I'm Rob.
I'm John.
And this is the Mint One podcast,
where we talk all things NFTs and the rise of blockchain gaming.
One of the biggest problems across the entire of the crypto industry is onboarding.
I think everyone's approach to it is wrong. Let's dive into it.
Right, yeah. So, episode 40. That's a lot of episodes.
It is.
I'm flustered today, which you are already aware of. I've had the busiest week and I just feel like I haven't stopped. Usually I like to spend a good few hours doing a bit of prep, writing some notes on the topic. But I've sort of splurged down 2 A4 pages of things that were already in my head. And yeah, I feel, and then obviously my, as you know, my light tried to catch fire before we went on air. I mean, I could literally see smoke out the corner of my eye. That's how I knew there was an issue.
From an LED.
Yeah, from an LED as well.
From a gel over an LED.
So it's a cheap LED. I've got my main light is like one of, I was an ambassador for the brand. So, that's a really nice light, but, I needed a third light for something. So it's just a little cheapy, but, it showed how cheap it was when the LED tried to, fire. Burrow its way through things.
Well, I will say, if you're busy, hopefully that means there's some exciting, fun things coming. So.
Yeah, well, we have one collaborative, exciting, fun thing coming, do we not?
We do. For a moment, I was like, do we?
Is it announced?
And I was like, yes, it is. Sorry, so yes, Atomic Cup Live London, 2nd of November, completely free. We'll have Jonah, Fabian, Jeffrey, myself, whole bunch of other people from the Atomic Hub side, plus a lot of people from the community as well. We're all getting together one day before NFT London to kind of celebrate the Wax community, celebrate the US community, bringing a load of projects on stage so they can talk about what they're doing, what's coming up from their side. And of course, we're going to talk about what's coming up from the Atomic Hub side as well. So yeah, there's going to be keynotes, there's going to be panels, which you'll be a part of.
Yeah.
And all sorts of fun stuff. It'll be the first time. I know in NFT NYC there was like a Wax community meetup that the Wax team themselves organised, and William Quigley was there and all of that. But again, that was kind of like an exclusive. You couldn't really walk into it kind of thing. What's this? I mean, our event is completely open to anybody. Like, don't even need to be a part of the Wax OES communities or even blockchain communities at all. It's completely free. So if you head to live.atomichub.io.com. Oh, I should know that.
So many dots there. is that definitely right?
It's live.atomichub.io. You can find the link to get your free ticket there, and yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you all there.
Yeah,
should be a lot of fun. We've had quite a lot of sign-ups so far, actually. So yeah, we're looking forward to it, and by all means, keep an eye on the socials, and we'll see what we announce. But other than events wise, it seems like there's a lot of games going from, well, just moving into their next stages at the moment, or coming out with big announcements, whether it's, hey, we're playable for the first time, or hey, big partnership coming, etc. And there's some interesting embargoes that I think will have lifted by the time this podcast goes out.
Yes.
It
depends. I don't know. I'm so scared of embargoes. I'm actually missing a preview event. I think I can mention the event without breaching any embargoes. Maybe I can't. I won't. I'm actually missing something. There's an event right now for a Metaverse game that I've been following, and they're inviting people on it for the first time to have a look around. Cool. And I'm missing it to be on this podcast, but priorities. But it does feel like a lot of projects that have been, in development for a while, they're either entering alpha or the alphas are now entering the next phases. So yeah, it's all good stuff. It's an exciting time.
Yeah, it is an exciting time. Speaking of games that are coming up, let's move on to the topic of the podcast, which is onboarding, and more importantly, why I think everybody's wrong.
Yeah, I don't even really know what you mean by that yet. So I'm excited to learn let's get straight into it. What do you mean?
Yeah. So obviously the last few podcasts we've had 2 guests. We've had Michael from Skyweaver, we have had Matt from Big Time, but also on NFT Insider itself, we've been interviewing people from Shrapnel, people from Atmos Labs, all sorts of people from other projects. And I always ask everybody the same question, which is, what is the biggest problem in blockchain gaming today, and how do we solve it? Okay. And I'd say a good 4 times out of 5, the answer is always education. Oh, we need more education. We need to, teach people the benefits. We need to make them understand why Web3 is this big, cool thing and everybody should get involved. And I think, I don't mean any disrespect to anybody who's given that answer. I think it's a fine answer, but I think it misses the bigger point. I think saying that education is the main issue for why blockchain gaming or the industry as a whole hasn't reached the heights that we want it to yet is just a cop-out answer. I think you're kind of taking the question a bit too literally and avoiding the bigger picture here. So I think it's easy to blame people outside of Web3 or outside of blockchain for kind of not understanding the space enough, or, they just don't get it, or they don't understand, or, all they've done is listen to, loads of these hit pieces or negative sentiment. And whilst that's definitely there, and there's a lot of negative sentiment around the industry, there's a lot of people saying things aren't necessarily true. I think the real problem lies in a different location. So convincing someone to change their habits or to adopt something new into their life is so much tougher than it just naturally becoming a part of what they do. And so if we look back when computers first became a thing, when the internet first came to prominence, when social media exploded, it didn't explode because of education and everyone telling people why it was the next big thing and why they should get involved. It was a necessity, and they had to become a part of it. These new technological developments and these new experiences, they were better than what we previously had. They were quicker, they were more convenient. They just enhanced what we already had. And I think that's what's going to happen to blockchain, and I think that's kind of the main point that I want to drive home. I think in a nation, what a word. I think I've cued something new there. Anyway, education in and of itself can't draw someone in. Like, there's no emotional attachment to education. Like, if I told you about this amazing new game, it doesn't have to be blockchain, I wouldn't try and sell it to you by detailing all of the mechanics and how on the back end, how the game works, and, in-depth info about the lore, because you get bored. Like, for example, if I talk about Skyweaver, which I think is an amazing game, I'll say, hey, it's a brand new trading card game, and with a few twists that will appeal to competitive card game fans. I'm like, okay, I kind of get the gist of it. Sounds intriguing. I'll give it a go. If I explain Skyweaver to you by saying something along the lines of, they've got this new mechanic called Rush, and when you play a card, it does this, and then outside of the game, you can own your cards and they're NFTs, and you're like, I don't care. Like, it's cool, and there might be cool benefits, but there's nothing to emotionally get me invested into why this is cool or why I should get involved. Like, there's no point saying ownership or money, because, for money, for some people, cool, but it's not something that's going to appeal to a mass market audience. There's not going to be flocks of people come from traditional gaming or come from, just the general public into blockchain games because, I can own my items now, or, I can make $5. Nobody, that doesn't entice anybody. So what I think so my answer to that question, what is the biggest problem in blockchain gaming today and how do we solve it? I think it's twofold. One, we need to integrate NFTs more into the existing lives of the general public. So AMC is doing this, for example, with, their Connect members who get NFTs for being part of the program. And other loyalty schemes we're seeing popping up where NFTs just become a part of what people do anyway. So it doesn't matter. If they care about them, what their thoughts are about them, they've got them now. And over time, those will, become more useful, become a more, important part of what they do. And secondly, we need more groundbreaking kind of must-have experiences. I see a lot of things on Reddit where people are like, there's no good Web3 games, and there are, but nobody really talks about them, and there's very, very few of them out there. And even the best experiences struggle to find the audiences that I feel that they deserve. So let's bring up Skyweaver again. If you go to the Skyweaver website, on their homepage, right at the bottom, well, at the bottom of the first kind of screen you see, if you see what I mean, there's a quote or review from me talking about how good the game is. And whilst it's cool that they've used my quote, and I get some representation out of that, it's not like it's PC Gamer or Destructoid or a big like YouTube gaming influencer or people that have massive sway outside of blockchain. Like the people that read NFT Insider, at the moment at least, are mostly people in the industry who know what it's about, who, we don't have much of an audience outside of that. And whilst I want to grow NFT Insider into this big kind of company that, helps to onboard people and, we get more of a sway in the traditional gaming space, etc., it just feels like we're in our own four walls and promoting amongst ourselves, and there's not too much impetus or excitement about the game outside of those four walls. So yeah, I'll stop ranting there. I think I've just gone off on one for about 5 minutes. There's things I want to add, but in general, do you agree that education's a bit of a cop-out? And what do you think is the biggest problem in blockchain games today?
Okay, so as is always the case, I have about 5 things in my head, and it's very difficult to keep them all in there at the same time. I should just write notes, but I like to not write notes. So firstly, I agree with almost everything you're saying, but I think there is nuance to the education answer. Okay. So when it comes to players, I agree. To say that education of players is the most important thing would be at odds with the thing I've repeated on several episodes already, which is that crypto blockchain technology, more specifically, should be running in the background and just doing its work. We shouldn't be aware. It's like a game engine. I shouldn't have to be thinking about Unity when I'm logging into a Unity game. It's just something that helped build it, and it's patched on it, and it's part of the foundations, and so I think it would be at odds for me to say that I think blockchain technology should be running in the background, but that education's a big problem. So I agree with you there. However, where I diverge slightly, but I reckon you agree with me, is I think there's nuance to the answer in that I think education of developers is probably important because they need to see why blockchain is valuable to their games and why tokenizing their currencies might be a good idea, why item ownership can be cool. I think that particularly Web2 games developers may not be aware of all the benefits of Web3, and their whole career is based on the nitty gritty behind the scenes, on the nuts and the bolts of it. So I think education of players, I agree. I just think you're flogging a dead horse at this point. They're either already sold on it or they're not sold on it. We just need use cases. And that's one of the things I loved about the Skyweaver booth at Gamescom, is that people kept saying to them, oh, this is blockchain. Like, this uses NFTs. Like, what? Yep. Which sounds, as I said to Michael on the podcast, that sounds deceptive, but it isn't. That's how it should be. It just, you don't have to interact with it as like there shouldn't be blockchain games and non-blockchain games. It should just be games eventually. So I agree with that. I think education of players is pointless or near pointless, but we should still educate developers. As for my answer, what is the biggest problem? I've thought about this. My answer's changed to this a lot. And I just don't know anymore I don't think there's any one problem. It sounds like a complete cop-out, but onboarding is still, I think, the biggest problem. We still, and I mean that across the entire of crypto, not just blockchain gaming, not just NFTs, but the purchase of crypto, custodial wallets. I think a lot of it is really intimidating, confusing. It's too easy to make mistakes that are very damaging, mistakes that, like, even moving your own crypto around is so much worse than moving your own fiat currency around. I mean, it's almost impossible. If you're careful, it's almost impossible to lose your money by sending it between your own bank accounts. Because if you get the account details wrong, it will tell you, and it's very hard to lose access to your own bank account. But these things in crypto are commonplace and painful, very painful. It's also, I think, far easier to get scammed in Web3. And I think that has to do with onboarding because of there's so much confusion. It's easy for, the unscrupulous to slip into those gaps and exploit them. So I haven't done this as a segue into the whole episode at large, but I do think onboarding is the biggest problem. And when we were discussing which topic we should do today, John suggested onboarding because we've never done a full episode on it. And I think it's right. And I was trying to think how to set the episode up the best. And I think onboarding is kind of a holistic term that can be broken down more. And correct me if I'm wrong, you might want to add some to this, but when I think of onboarding, I think there are onboarding of users into crypto. That's getting people into things like Coinbase, Binance, getting people to hold cryptocurrencies and tokens. Yep. Then I think there's onboarding of companies into the use of crypto and blockchain. That could be anything from DeFi and finance through to, art houses. Sotheby's, I guess, were onboarded in a way because they had to hold things and, so they had to use blockchain technology. Then there's onboarding of developers, which is gaming and otherwise. No matter what the developer develops, we have to get more people into the ecosystem of developing with blockchain technology. And then finally, there's onboarding of players, which you could put under users of crypto, but I think they're distinct. So they're the types of onboarding. And I think they each have their own slightly different problems, but as a whole, it's generally the confusion. So we've done soliloquy tennis again. Thoughts?
I agree with you. I think we can break onboarding down into several different compartments, let's say. Let's touch on the kind of the business side at the moment. So from my point of view, when it comes to business attention, like just across business in general, is all over Web3 at the moment. You've got brands making partnerships. There's tons of investment coming in. Web3 is the big area of investment right now in terms of like brand new tech fields. But the consumer attention is not there yet, mostly because a lot of these, partnerships and things that are being funded, we're looking at there being 2-3 years away at least. So of course the consumers haven't caught up. These things take years to build, years to develop, and then when they get released, hopefully the wider public will move across and think they're really cool. But again, the same thing kind of happened with computers, with the internet, with social media. These things were on a business side planned, several years before they became massive things in public consciousness. And on the developer note, I feel that there's two different approaches that developers are bringing to Web3 at the moment. One, which tends to be the larger studios, are like, hey, we're going to create this cool game and we're going to look for a blockchain to work with and we're going to bring our player base basically to that blockchain. And the flip side to that is it tends to be more indies or more people that are like first-time devs or don't have too much experience in the space. They approach it from hey, I'm going to integrate as many blockchains as I can because then I can tap into those communities and those communities will play my game. So one of them is, hey, I'm taking an existing audience and bringing it to blockchain. Another one is, hey, I want to build off of the existing blockchain audience. Yeah. And I think if we want blockchain to have that mass adoption, if we want loads of players in, if we want loads of people enjoying blockchain games, then, I'm not a developer, but I think that second option where you're not trying to leech off what's already here, but I just think it's fundamentally the wrong choice. Like, if you want to make money, fine. There's plenty of people in the community, there's plenty of people that are quite happy to throw fairly ridiculous amounts of money away at like $2,000 beta passes and, whatever items there are in NFT games that just, for whatever reason get into spurious, financials that just rocket off into space and you can make 10K, whatever. But if you want to build the foundation for a reputable industry that lasts a long amount of time, that has quality games on it, and that helps to make blockchain technology an integral part, or not even an integral part, but in addition to the gaming space that we already know and love, then you have to come into it as a developer or as somebody building into the space as, hey, I'm going to build something cool. I'm going to find the blockchain that works for me, and then appeal to people outside of blockchain to come and try this out. And as I said, I think the big AAAs and things are adopting that approach. But especially on the Wax blockchain lately, there's been several games that are like, hey, Wax isn't working for us. Let's jump to this chain because they've got a different audience and we can onboard new players. Or let's go here or let's go there. And a lot of the times it doesn't work. I think if you're incorporating lots of blockchains into one game, you're inherently making it more complex, which only serves to drive the point home that new players just can't really get into it. So like if you've got, I think I've mentioned before there's an MMO being built at the moment that they're boasting about having 5 or 6 blockchains integrated into it. That seems like a terrible design choice. Like, unless they come up with some amazing system to make that all mesh well and work, in tandem with one another, I just think it's going to be a mess. And I can't see someone from outside the blockchain space being like, oh, so I've got to make like 4 wallets, and I've got to have all these private keys, and I've got to... It just becomes such a mess, and nobody outside of crypto wants to deal with that. Yeah. So...
I know one... I don't know if we're talking about this same game. I don't think we are, but I know one game that's multi-chain and is aggressively pushing multi-chain. The way they're doing it, and I still think this has got a lot of things that need to be overcome, but you don't have to have multiple wallets or anything. You just basically pick which chain you're already a part of or that you want to use, and everything you receive is in that ecosystem. So you'll get NFTs on that chain. The only thing that creates is, I imagine that will cause many, many issues for the economy of the game, where there'll be price variations. Maybe they won't. Maybe it balances itself out, but it does strike me as that being problematic. With developers choosing ecosystems or choosing blockchains, I think you're right, but I think there's also a third reason, which is probably the most pure reason that it can be, which is, onboarding. Like, some chains are tremendously difficult to build on. They don't have much support. They don't have, and I mean support in a lot of ways. So when developers are looking at these chains, they want lots of things. They want an SDK, which we can talk about in depth because that is a big part of onboarding developers. Yep. They want support, like documentation, information about the ecosystem and how it works, and perhaps they want funding as well. Funding's available for like Polygon fund a lot of projects. Engine Starter is Engine's sort of startup one. Solana have a fund. Most chains that are aiming for games, they want to attract these developers. And so there has become a sort of race for who can be the most frictionless onboarding experience for these developers. That's already starting to go into, like, how you have like layer 1 blockchains or layer 0s, and then you have like layer 2s. We're already seeing a sort of secondary layer to onboarding. For example, Solana has they try and attract games, and they have some sort of SDK. They have some documentation. I think they all have pretty extensive documentation. But now Fractal, which is a platform on Solana and one of my favorite examples of good onboarding, that now has Fractal Developer Hub, which is trying to bring games as well. So we've got like the layer 2 of onboarding, where these companies that are built within an ecosystem also have good reason to try and bring people in. And that, I think that at the moment, that's a big problem for a lot of chains that were front runners early on for gaming, for example. A lot of the front runners, I think, have fallen away due to onboarding in general. And there's certain companies that have done it well. So Solana's an interesting one, because not only have they've got Fractal and they've got documentation, but there was a piece of news buried in their Web3 phone announcement that I don't think people really paid enough attention to. So the Saga is Solana's Web3 phone. It was mentioned, I don't know if they actually mentioned this, but it was mentioned by a lot of outlets that they were looking to onboard users into crypto. I suspect that when that phone comes out, it will cater for people already in Web3. I don't think a phone's going to bring people, but whatever. However, one thing that I did find interesting about this, and this was really buried in the announcement, I thought, was they're launching, I think they may have even opened it up to a lot of developers already, is a Solana mobile stack SDK, which is an SDK for Web3 app development. Now, there aren't many of those that I know of. So that could end up being the path of least resistance. If there's Web2 developers or app developers who are thinking, let's see what we can do with blockchain, or let's make a crypto app, or, maybe we'll get funding for that. But then they start looking around, okay, there's no SDKs. Do we really have to build one? Do we have to try and solve all the problems ourselves? Because, an SDK, that is essentially what it does. It solves, it probably reduces 75% plus of the amount of development time you need. I'm just guessing that number completely, but it solves so many problems for you and stops you having to do things yourself. Yep. Which sounds lazy, but really you're just saving an enormous amount of money. And imagine like every time you booted up your computer, you had to go through code and doing all the basic functions that the computer and your BIOS just does for you. And that's what an SDK does. So yeah, it's strange at the moment. And SDKs, I think, is really the central cog for the next stage of onboarding, particularly developers. But with that, as we said, I don't know if it was last week or the week before on the pod, we said that by onboarding developers, you are onboarding players because they're building things that people will, come and play. So SDKs, I think that's the next bit. Yeah,
I had several discussions this week actually, but I had one particular discussion with a person at a particular blockchain. I don't think I can name the chain, but they were talking about onboarding and the developers they're working at and the SDKs that they have at their disposal, and the fact that we've got these SDKs. We're looking at mobile. We know mobile is going to be a big area too, and I agree with you. I think SDKs are. For those of you listening to this who aren't game developers, you're probably like, what the hell's an SDK? Rob, I think, described it fairly well there, but I think it's difficult to understate just how important they are for a developer to make it as easy as possible for them to build a blockchain game. It's a huge amount of time you don't have to spend. Yes, of course, you'll need to get access to it. You might have to pay some money or whatever, but it saves so much time and makes things so much easier that you're just going to end up getting better games in blockchain through an SDK. But yes, as I was saying, I was speaking to a particular blockchain earlier this week, and I got a quick look at some of the things that they've got in the pipeline. And I was, again, I can't name names, but I was surprised at the amount of AAAs and not just AAA game shooters, but like big real world IPs that are actively in discussions or have already signed contracts and who are really looking at Web3 as, hey, this is a brand new playground for us. This is a new space. And as I've said before, I think blockchain in general is still in its land grab phase. Everybody's just looking for their piece of the pie, and there just seems to be endless pie out there. There definitely isn't endless pie.
This got strange.
But there's this feeling in the industry that there's so much out there to get, and there's we've already got so many players, and there's this huge community of gamers we can appeal to, and there may be not as much realism in the space as is required for it to exist long term. But it's good that at this stage we have a lot of people in there that really believe in the technology and who understand the benefits it can have in spite of what popular opinion is against the technology itself. As I've said in the past, how can you hate a technology? It's it's binary, it's ones and zeros, it's code. It's not malicious in and of itself. It's just how people are using it right now.
Yeah.
And I would agree that at the moment, a lot of the ways people are using Web3 are not... Okay, there's not a lot of good examples. Let's say there's a lot of bad actors, there's a lot of malicious intent, and it's hard to find the diamonds in the rough that are building the really cool things that we all want to see. But, you know, in the background, we know that there's the partnerships going on. We know that there's things at work. And come 18, 24, 36 months down the line, we'll start to see the fruits of that labour and the fruits of those partnerships. But the wait is so frustrating. I wish it could come now, but it is just a waiting game.
But I think part of the frustration is anybody who spends a lot of time looking at this, as we do, you know, I write about it every single day, 7 days a week, whether it's for Token Gamer or not. And so I see a lot of news, and it can feel like there's just been so much happening that I don't know why we're not moving quicker. I think one of the key areas, I always default to gaming because it's the area I know the most about, but we're seeing AAA studios investing in blockchain. They're creating Web3 divisions. They are working with major companies. So there's that side of things. We already know that the big games, the big companies are already working in it. We know that. That's not like hyperbole. It's not rumor. No. That's just true. And if you can't find proof of that right now, you just have to trust me for probably another 6 to 12 months, and then I think the news will start coming out. But it's already out. I mean, everyone already knows. But then you've also got the other side of this, which is Web3 companies are realize that this is coming and that they're trying to help facilitate it because it's good for everyone, and they're trying to accelerate it. And there's actually a lot of companies already who their sole purpose is trying to onboard. So there's, I don't know if you've heard of Game 7.
Yes.
So their whole purpose of Game 7 is to accelerate onboarding of gamers and developers into using blockchain in their games, you know, whatever. They raised $500 million by the likes of BitDAO, which is, I think, the biggest DAO, financial DAO. It has the support of Peter Thiel, who's obviously like VC royalty, and then Fort, which in itself is an interesting platform that's working on building economic technology for gaming, for games using blockchain technology. I don't really know what that means, but, you know, the tokenization of currencies in games is pretty difficult. So I presume it's around that. But then you've also got one of my favorite companies in the space is FTX. I've used them for a long time before they were called FTX, and they launched FTX Gaming. And this is another one where I feel like people didn't see. I mean, maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm just being arrogant and think I see it differently. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but the launch of FTX Gaming, to me, felt as if the initial scope of their new team, they created an entire department called FTX Gaming, and it appeared to me that the whole scope of that was onboarding. FTX will support gaming tokens and NFTs within games, and basically they're furthering the adoption of blockchain technology to be, I think they said, crypto as a service provider for publishing developers. Like, they're trying to insert themselves into that gap between the AAA studios and current Web3. And so FTX Gaming is essentially going to help these AAA studios with launching tokens and NFTs within their projects, and maybe not just AAA, maybe the more indie developers or the smaller publishing houses. But we're finally seeing there's like a full front line of everything we need to get this into the next place. And that's why you and I are so frustrated, is because we just have to wait. The only thing that's left is time. The money's there, the people are there, the infrastructure is being built. Yep. It's just not ready yet. Although, having said that, I think the onboarding of players and the onboarding of users still isn't good enough. I think some people are doing it well. Sequence Wallet, Skyweaver, Engine Wallet, Coinbase to an extent. I think there are good examples of it, but we're still a way off of it being probably where it needs to be for these AAA games to really. I mean, we don't know, but I would say that's probably a consideration in why they're not already pushing stuff out. It's less to do with public perceptions and more to do with they know if they launch something with these public perceptions and then there's scams or a bridge gets hacked and you lose 600 million, that is difficult to recover from. So I think that's perhaps why they're dragging their feet a little bit, but it is frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah. There's this weird dichotomy between the speed of the blockchain, the Web3 communities, where everything is a million miles a second. We want more news, we want it quicker, we want it more often, and the nature of just how long all of this takes on the back end, like whether you're building a game, whether you're building, an SDK or, a new marketplace or an exchange or whatever. These things take ages. I mean, this week I've gotten back into World of Warcraft. Bad idea. But anyway.
Wrath of Lich King release.
Yeah, I was playing the... Yeah,
nerdy.
Yeah, oh yes it is. But, I mean, if we look at World of Warcraft way back in the day, when WoW first released in 2004, that took, I think it was between 4 and 5 years to develop. From like scratch to its, 1.0 release. And, I mean, we keep talking about wanting like really cool MMOs, and I'm sure Big Time has been in development for several years now. Skyweaver's been in development for several years. The really impressive Web3 games that we have at the minute, they've not been, hey, we've built this in 4 weeks and now we've got a cool game. It's, we've been slogging at this for 4 years and this is what we've got and we're still building and we're still improving it. And contrasting that to the space where, I mean, if you're in a Discord for a project and they don't give you an update for 2 weeks, people start wondering if they've disappeared.
Yeah.
People start wondering if they've cut and run and have just ran away with everyone's money and,
But we know why that happens for 2 reasons, doesn't it? It's the impatience and then the fact that a lot of people are cutting and running with the money.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is true. But it's just the consequences of having this, what is essentially a financial market on top of something like game development. Or it creates so much speculation and people just demand more often. I mean, Final Fantasy XIV, I think, is, when it comes to how they interact with their player base, has done it better than most games in general over the past few years. And I think, is it every month or every 6 weeks or so, they do a live letter, which is where Yoshi P, kind of the lead dev, just does a live stream and says, hey, here's what we work on, here's what you can expect. But if you did that kind of once a month update for blockchain NFT games, people would just be like, you're not talking to us enough. We're not as involved. We've bought NFTs in this, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's also, from the developer side, I feel like developers are kind of being pressured into releasing footage, releasing alphas, releasing gameplay before it's ready. Yeah. Like, the Blockchain Brawlers open beta went live this week? Anyway, it went live recently. If that was a Web 2 game, I don't believe it would have gone into this beta phase in the state that it's in. Right. They openly say on the game that, hey, it's about 60% to the level we want it to be at on release. I don't think if that was being developed as a Web 2 game, they'd be happy to release it. I think developers are pressured into having to kind of satiate their community by doing things at a time scale that suits the community rather than what suits the developers. Because like I said, whereas, developers could be hard at work for, weeks and months on end building cool stuff in Web 2, and they don't necessarily need to update the community at all. Like, especially if the game isn't released yet, it's just, hey, we're still building. Or we might update you once in a while when we have something cool to show you, but, if we went 6 months without saying anything, so long as we're still building, you're not really going to care.
No.
Whereas if you gave that 6 month gap to a blockchain game, it's like, people are going to start leaving. If you've released any NFTs, the price of them have gone down. And it's also that a lot of these blockchain games are using NFTs to fund their development in the first place, which I just think I think that's a dangerous cycle to get into. Because I think as soon as you sell NFTs for a game that still has like a year of development left on it, you're then just going to feel rushed to, it's like, oh no, the price of these NFTs are going down, or, what's going on here? All the players are going away. We're getting a bad reputation. What's going on? And it causes so many issues. And that does hurt the perception of blockchain as it is at the moment. As a lot of people saying, hey, we're getting all of these games released, and they're releasing this like kind of poor quality, and they're not to the standard of Web 2 games. Where I wouldn't blame the community for it directly, but I think part of the reason why we're seeing those games come out in an earlier stage than they should is because the developers feel the need to, just get the community back on their side, I suppose. And, the AAAs and the big companies, they don't care. If they can develop a game for 3-4 years, blockchain or not, and when it comes out, people will play it. Because they've got that history, they've got that, hey, we've made cool games in the past, you're going to like what we're going to make next anyway. You're prepared to sit there and wait. And not everybody gets that same kind of level of credence or faith. So it's a very tricky scenario, but as we've said, from an onboarding perspective, I mean, as we both said, we know that there's AAAs in the space, but we know that they're not going to bring their audiences across yet for another few years. The only one that kind of is at the moment is Epic Games, and that's just because they've got Blancos on the Epic Games Store now. By the sounds of things, they're looking to get more kind of traditional blockchain games onto, or the good quality ones anyway, the good blockchain games onto the Epic Games Store to open them to their audience. So, although I think they're uniquely positioned in that way because they're a marketplace, it's not like a game can. It's not like Ubisoft, for example. I mean, they tried with those. I mean, they were dreadful. But like Square Enix, for example, they're not going to bring across their audience for another few years. It doesn't make sense for them. It's just going to harm their reputation if they do it now. Like if they come out and they're like, hey, in 4 weeks' time, I'm going to release this game. It's part of Final Fantasy or whatever. It'll have crypto. It'll have NFTs. There you go. Then you no longer have this like 2.5 year waiting period where people are like, oh my god, when's it coming out? Why can't it come out now? Why aren't you telling us anything? It's like, well, it's there. It'll be there in 4 weeks. Wait 4 weeks and you can play it. And I mean, I'm not saying I'm not a specialist when it comes to community management or marketing or anything. I'm just saying what I'm thinking. But from like a gamer's point of view, I can understand it both from the player side and from the developer side. And there's a very sensitive balance that needs to be struck there for both the players and for the developers to do well coming out the other side of it.
Yeah, I think the problem with crypto at the moment is it's very hype centric. Yeah. Perhaps because it's so new and the life cycle of hype is pretty short. So a lot of these games probably feel pressured. Like developers of games feel pressured because they want to capitalize on the fact that they actually have eyes on their project, which isn't always, that's sometimes spun as like a money grabbing thing. But, if you're building something, it's very hard. It doesn't matter what you're building, where you're building it. It's very hard to get eyes on something unless you've got a ton of money behind you. Yeah. So if you do get a bit of shine and people are paying you attention, you want to keep them interested, which is tremendously difficult. And I think it can lead as a mixture of reasons, that's one. And then obviously people, being so wary of rug pulls and stuff, they want constant updates to see that, money and time is being put to good use. And you end up with the Pixelmon situation where essentially they launched, they were called a rug pull. The reason I brought them up actually is because at the moment they're doing a recovery tour. So for anyone that doesn't know, Pixelmon, they sold like best part of 10,000, NFTs for the game. It's kind of like a Pokemon style game where you own NFT Pokemon called Pixelmon. The game raised $70 million plus. There were Pixelmon selling for $8,000 plus, and then they did all these previews, and the art style was kind of like Minecrafty, blocky looking things. Yep. And then when they actually let people look at some of the models, there's the greatest tweet of all time, which we have linked in the show notes before, which is the comparison of Kevin, which has become like the flagship meme of the game. It's like this fat zombie thing. And I mean, how it actually looked in game was absolutely insane. Like if this came out in 1996, you would have said, nah, that looks rubbish, I'll leave it. And the fact that it was coming out in 2022, it was in February this year, they did the reveal. And I think from what I've heard from their developers and people that worked on the project, and there seemed to be a general consensus that they didn't want to show anything yet. Nothing was ready, and that it was a very large misstep. And now, so they got accused of being a rug pull because they rushed this thing out, and now they've got entirely new leadership and senior. They've got a new senior art guy. They got a new CEO, the VC of LiquidX, which bought a 60% stake in the project, and the new art. It looks great now. Like the new art style actually looks great, and I wrote an article about this week. Like they're actually. Pixelmon are kind of taking it lightly. Like they upload the occasional meme of that fat Kevin pixelated zombie. Yeah. They know they made a massive mistake and now they have to win people back. But it's difficult, isn't it? If you get as much hype as you did. I mean, I think when you get $70 million worth of hype, I don't think you need to rush as much as you think you do. Because people have put money in. If you've spent $8,000 on an NFT, you're not going to. It's unlikely you're just going to go, right, I'll check back in every day until they give me something, or I'll kick off. I think you've probably got more time, but this is just the state of things, I guess.
Yeah, my one worry with Pixelmon is they've said that they're planning to launch their MMO RPG in Q1 of next year.
That's actually that's the delayed date, by the way.
Yeah,
it was originally Q3 of this year. So,
I mean, with them having just revealed the new art, do I really think that within the next 6 months they'll be able to blow everyone away with a really cool MMO experience? No,
but it's because people are saying alpha. You get away with so much.
I get away with so much. I mean, there's very, very few games nowadays, other than indie titles with like proper teams or like the big AAA releases that don't release in an alpha stage. And then if there's any bugs or if there's anything that's wrong, they're like, oh, it's just a beta, it's an alpha, what do you expect? So it's like, come on, you can't really sell your game and get, take in all the money and then just be like, oh, it's if it's broken, it's just an alpha.
It seems to go a few ways. So outside of Web3, traditional games, you very rarely see alphas. You don't really get to have a look at the alpha because the alpha's like internal testing when everything's still a bit messy. And then in Web3, alphas are just, everybody gets into an alpha if you're willing to spend enough. Like you could join the alpha. But then the disparity between alphas, you get things like Pixelmon where you're essentially logging into 3D MS Paint and looking at something that someone scribbled 10 minutes before the launch. And then you contrast that with the Sandbox, which still calls itself an alpha, but is a pretty fleshed out game at this point and has a lot of experiences. In fact, amazing segue. The Sandbox are one of the best examples of onboarding companies into Web3. This is the other side of onboarding that we haven't really discussed yet, which is taking Web2 companies and just bringing them into the fold of Web3. And I think they've been fantastic at that. They've brought on some really, and they're constantly bringing on these really big names. They've brought on, off the top of my head, Snoop Dogg, obviously famously, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Deadmau, Adidas, the Walking Dead game, which actually looks quite good. Like that's nearing release. And these games, I refer to it as a meta game, the Sandbox, because it's kind of a game with games in it that you can go and play. And they've been onboarding. I'm not going to remember the game, but there was a game that was a cult classic about 10, 15 years ago, and then it just sort of died off, and the developers never made another one. And the Sandbox, I mean, I think I'm kind of making this up, how this happened. I have no idea how it happened, but it sounded like the Sandbox reached out to developers or vice versa and was like, can we resurrect our game in your game? Mm-hmm. And now they're bringing this cult classic into the Sandbox. I love that. I think that's great. And that is another type of onboarding, which is undervalued in a way. I don't think people appreciate how valuable that can be. And we see it with NFTs, but this might just be me and you may well vehemently disagree. I just care less with NFTs because it's just so easy to create, like when they do these sticker packs of stickers for a brand, I'm just like, am I really meant to care about that? It seems so low effort for you haven't really onboarded them. They've kind of gone, yeah, all right, I guess if we get a bit of money out of it, you can do that. Whereas, if they're developing a game or a proper Web3 product, I mean, there are, like Blancos has had some really decent collaborations. I think there are examples of where they've created skins and things like that. And I just find that more interesting than, sticker packs. But then I don't really like sticker packs outside of it.
I think we're seeing more and more legacy brands, not I say legacy brands, I mean traditional, that are
That's bold, calling them legacy already.
Yeah.
We're still in that legacy.
Integrating themselves into blockchain games, but not even just blockchain games, but games in general. Like the Louis Vuitton collab with League of Legends, or with Rayman Raven Rabbids in the Sandbox, or I mean that's a game anyway. But you know what I mean. You know, they're using it as a way to kind of revitalize their brand to a younger audience, especially in the Rabbids case. I mean, it wasn't exactly a dead kind of series, but I don't think anyone's cared about Rabbids in a while, and now they're in Sandbox. It's like, oh, I remember Rabbids. Oh, they're in the Sandbox. That's cool. Maybe that's they're going to start reviving that IP. So
don't you think that's a brilliant way? Sorry, don't you think that's a brilliant way of recapturing people, or capturing anyone, particularly traditional gamers, because you're playing on, like, think of the games. I mean, you're a fetus, so 20 years ago you're probably not playing anything. But if I think of the games that I loved 15, 20 years ago, if the Sandbox collaborated with them, I mean, they kind of did. Tony Hawk's, they kind of did. But if they collaborated with these games that I loved as a kid, I would be. I mean, I'm already on the Sandbox because they're a big part of Web3 gaming at the moment. But I think that's a great way of getting people to go, I'll try it. I mean, I do love that game, and I haven't played that in years. Maybe that'd be fun. I think that's a really clever way of onboarding that is perhaps a little bit undervalued. Yeah,
I think I agree, but I was just out of interest. I wanted to know if Crash Bandicoot had NFTs or had gotten into the Sandbox or something, just because I love the Crash Bandicoot IP. I've been playing those on PS2 since God knows when. Yeah. And I look it up, and apparently there's some project on Binance which is like, oh, we're creating Crash Bandicoot World, and it's a virtual world where players can build things and monetize their experiences.
Please don't say Metaverse.
Please stop. I mean, they've basically said Metaverse without saying Metaverse.
Yeah, I'm very tired of that.
And I'm like, just whoever controls that IP, just talk to Sandbox, get in there and create something cool. Like, there has to be something of benefit. And I think there's so many of these brands that are intent on, we're going to build our own metaverse. And like, unless you've got a ton of money that you can throw at it, I think you've kind of already missed the boat if you want to become like the big number one. Like, we've got Sandbox, we've got Decentraland, we've got Facebook's Meta's Horizon Worlds, I think it's called. But anyway, I mean, what they end up doing with that, I have no idea. But it's going to be very difficult if you create a new metaverse now for yours to be the one that reigns supreme. But just going back to when we was talking about releasing games in early stages and going back to Pixelmon's MMO, again, if that comes out and is any good, even if it's Q1 next year alpha stage, I'll be amazed. But that reminded me of when Gala Games first released footage of Mirandus, which was quite a while ago now, and people's first reactions to it was basically like, "What the f*** is this?" Shit?
You better mark that. That's a double bleeper.
Yeah, but this was like, you've got all this money, you've got all this hype, all this like funding behind the studio, and you give us this. What are you doing? And again, if it wasn't a Web3 game, they would have given it the 6 months, 12 months it needed, and she'd be like, okay, here it is, much further along in the development cycle. And
it does look good now.
Yeah, it looks a lot better now than it did back then, and I think they made a mistake back then.
Yeah, they'd been developing it like 10 minutes.
Yeah, like, this is one thing I kind of, for developers, you must know. Because if you're a developer, you must love video games, you've been in the industry a long time, you'll know whether your game looks good or is going to be received well, or, I don't know, maybe you fall into that kind of delusion where you're like, I have something cool and unique and it might not look great at the minute, but it'll get better. I think that's one of the biggest cop-outs, by the way. I mean, like, our game's going to get better over time. Like, of course it is. Like, what game has gotten worse? I mean, apart from World of Warcraft, what game has gotten worse over time? Like, by people continuing to develop on it. But anyway, that's a side point. But I understand why developers might kind of fall into that delusion of being like, I've got to get something out. I've got to get people interested in this. I can't miss the boat. People are going to leave. People are going to talk bad things about our product.
So I want to jump in there for one to add one extra point is so Token Gamer has been consulting on a few games to just help them into Web3 and give them some sort of advice. And there is one consideration which I reckon has affected a lot of the games we've talked about. I suspect it's had a role in perhaps blockchain brawlers as well. And that is sometimes the deadlines aren't anything to do with the community or the developers, but rather their funding or higher management or the publishers. I mean, how many times have we seen, the game I've whinged about a lot is Battlefield 2042. And I find it very hard to imagine the original DICE developers that have done all the Battlefields. They removed all the destruction of the worlds, which was in the alpha and the beta testing. They removed all this stuff. The game's buggy, didn't have a scoreboard. I mean, we've had scoreboards since like the 1980s. And there's just no way the developers were like, don't worry about it. Let's just get it out. They were under pressure from publishers. They were under pressure for deadlines. And I know from the games we're talking to, they have deadlines. Their financiers, they have set hard deadlines they have to meet. That's kind of rough. So I think there is another element that, they end up having to rush things through, particularly perhaps if sales don't do well as well. If you do like pre-sales or you do the Web3 version of, NFT sales and drops and things, and if people don't show much interest in it, then, scrutiny goes up and people push deadlines.
Yeah, I think over the past 25 years, the nature of game development and how teams manage development of their games has changed massively. I think it used to be 25 years ago, if you needed an extra 3 months to really polish a game and make it as good as it can be, it's annoying, but I think people will be much more open to giving you that 3 months. Nowadays, it's like, no, this must release on this date, in this state, and I don't want to get into a discussion about crunch in video games because we'd be here for hours, but there's so much more pressure now from publishers to be like, okay, studio, this needs to be done by then. It has to be. And whatever state it's in, we need to push it out the door. And I think for the ways that some people that are building Web3 games are using NFTs as like to basically fund their development, and if they're doing that, I think that just exacerbates that problem, because rather than having a publisher that is like, okay, here's a date, and it might be 12 months down the line. You're like, okay, you've got 12 months. And now you're beholden to a community of 2,000 people that have all purchased an NFT for $50 that are like, we want it now. We want it now. Like, why aren't you talking to us? Why aren't you giving us updates? Why aren't you sharing news with us? Why aren't you talking? And it's just, I feel like for studios that are doing that, and I do think it's the wrong way to go about doing it. Of course, it's difficult to get funding, but I think it's much tougher to be beholden to a community, like a rabid community, especially because the NFTs are a financial instrument at that point. They go up and down in price, blah, 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 to like a publisher that has at least a little bit more knowledge of the industry. And it's like, okay, we understand these things take time to build. We're going to push you on deadlines. Don't get us wrong. Like, if you say you need 15 months, we'll give you 12. But at least they're being somewhat realistic. But I feel like that's just making things harder for developers, because what they used to... I mean, let's say they had a game, 25 years ago, they'd be like, okay, we need 24 months to develop this. And then, I don't know, give it 10 years ago, they'd be like, okay, we need 24 months, we've been given 18. And now we need 24, but we've got 12. And now we've got NFTs in, and these people want things tomorrow. And it's just, there's so much pressure in gaming in general, let alone with NFTs and blockchain being a part of that. And I don't quite know what the solution. I don't think there is a solution. I think people are always going to speculate. People are always going to, especially because we're in an industry where we're giving the community more power. It's a decentralized space. It's no longer all controlled by the publishers or all controlled by the studios, that the community feels that they are the center of everything, and that they should be able to dictate what happens at what time and where projects go. And, they should sit on community councils and decide where this blue chip NFT project goes. I think there's a lot of power in that, but it also brings up a lot of difficulties for developers, for publishers, for the people actually building in the space, that hasn't really been discussed, or kind of, nobody's really figured out what the best way of handling that is. And this is supposed to be a podcast about onboarding, but
it kind of is.
It kind of is, but yeah, it's it's tough. People being onboarded into Web3 games expect a lot more than they would do for like FIFA. If you sell someone FIFA, they play a football game, they buy some packs, they, whatever. If you onboard someone into a Web3 game, like, I've got NFTs, are these going to go up in value? What are you working on? Who's working on this? Why aren't you talking to us? And it's just, it's tough. It's tough. But I think if we want mass adoption, that needs to be, it just needs to be simplified. Like, I don't think the average gamer really, should they care what a development company is doing if they don't talk to their community for 2 months? Not really. They should just have the faith that they continue to build. But because there's so many companies in Web3 that are new to the space and people haven't heard of them before, they might have AAA talent, but they're new companies mostly. It's not like there's entities you can really trust. So if you have EA, I mean, yeah, a lot of people have problems with EA, but you can be certain they'll make a new FIFA every year, and they'll make a new X every year. And if something doesn't work, they'll fix it. And if the community has enough backlash about something, they'll fix it in, I don't know, give them a month, it'll be sorted. There's none of that trust or faith within Web3 development companies at the moment, because none of them have the experience of building blockchain games.
But we know the way around that, though. We know this is another drum we've banged many times, but we know the way around that, and that's transparency, which, if they show enough transparency, we've seen it with games. We've seen one of the best examples recently that I've seen, and I spoke to them briefly about it, is Hashrush, which is like an RTS. It's been in development. So we first covered them in 2018. So it's been in development for years, and I really like that they take their time with they're in fact they're a great counter example to a lot of the points we're bringing up. Mm-hmm. They've taken their time, but they have a part on their website which is like an interactive Notion box which shows everything they're working on, how many tasks are in each section, how many have been ticked off so far. I mean, that works perfectly for me, in lieu of constant communication of telling you what you're doing, because you can just check, like, what are they up to? Oh, they're bug fixing today. They've done 7 out of 7 bug fixes that they need to do. Yep. And we've seen a few games do that sort of level of transparency, and that's the only way to get around that.
I think if we're talking of transparency, that's the kind of transparency I'm talking about. I think a lot of games or a lot of companies developing Web3 games think transparency, and they're like, roadmap. It's like, roadmap is not transparency. Neither's a white paper. Like, these are just instruments to get people to get emotionally invested into your project, so that if you're selling NFTs, the price of them shored up. Like, real transparency, if development companies want to do that, is exactly what you described there. Is, hey, here's a list of the tasks we're doing. You could see what we're doing. We'll tick them off as we go. And I think that works for developers, as you said, because they don't need to be shouting all the time about, hey, we got this big feature going. They don't need to invest as much into controlling a community. It's just, we'll just do our thing, and you can follow along as we do it.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's a minefield, and we're not going to solve it. And I imagine, well, perhaps we've not even done justice to some of the problems that we can't even see. Like, I was trying to think of perhaps problems that gaming 25 years ago would have had with hitting deadlines. To be fair to them, they probably had a lot more difficulties with distribution pipeline, because you didn't have online downloads. You'd have to get the CDs made and the boxes made and the cover art made and then sent out all over the world to Electronics Boutique and Game and all these different. So I think there's probably a million problems, but onboarding, let's hopefully it gets easier, and it is getting easier.
It is getting easier. I think every day it's getting better.
There's just more examples of good onboarding, which is the same. It's the same thing, really. But there's more opportunities. I mean, 2018, the only SDK I ever saw, I think, was Engine. It's the only SDK I saw, and I think it was Unity, and that's how one game integrated it. There was one really good example in 2018. There was one game that integrated the Engine wallet through the SDK, which I think was for Unity. And it was just what everyone's aiming at now. So, I mean, it's just time, isn't it? You just get more and more examples of the things we want to see with every passing year. And eventually it's just going to reach tipping point where we just see people flooding into space, developers flooding into space. I think they already are, but it's certainly, I would still say it's the biggest problem. It's the biggest thing holding people back. But with the amount of money and interest, it's only a matter of time until it's solved.
Absolutely. I think it's going to continue being a discussion point for some time now, until we get to the point where it just happens. I think it's going to be seamless. I don't think it's going to be, one day, onboarding's a big problem, and the next day, it's sorted, here it is. It's going to happen organically, and we might not even notice it happening, but over the next, 12 months, 2 years, 3, it's just going to keep getting better to the point where we don't need to talk about it anymore. Yeah. Which I think that's going to be a long time coming.
Is we put a shelf life on this podcast, because there'll come a point where people are like, well, what, why would I want to listen to that? I don't care. It's easy.
Well, there we go. Episode 40 of Mint One. Feels like it's been a while since we've actually done a just us two episode. We've had a few guests on lately, which have been great.
3.5 weeks, I guess, since we've actually been on.
Yeah, now we're up to the big 40. So outro time. Rob, where can we find you?
You can find us at tokengamer.io for daily blockchain gaming news and all that good stuff. We have an app, iOS and Android. YouTube, you'll find us, type Token Gamer, Twitch /Token Gamer. Yeah, that's it. I'm going to be succinct.
That's very short. Yep. I'll see if I can match you with that.
You won't. So there's no way.
I'll try. So for NFT Insider, NFTinsider.io for the latest NFT news. If there's one article you should go and read, it is the exclusive card reveal we did for the newest Gods Unchained expansion. Or card set release, I should say. So go check that out.
Time's up.
Shame. Anyway, socials at NFTinsider_IO, Twitter and Instagram, giveaways, all that good stuff. Sign up to the newsletter, NFTinsider.io/newsletter, weekly giveaways, exclusive content, all that good stuff. For me personally, it's at HydroPowered, HYDROPWRD on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, a few other places. Daily tweets, live stream every Wednesday, playing blockchain games, talking about things. God, I'm really selling that show, aren't I?
These wheels are coming off.
and yeah, Atomic Hub Live. So November 2nd, live.atomichub.io. Go get your ticket. We look forward to seeing you there.
What are we talking about? Like,
I don't
literally
think I've...
So who's it? It's you. We've got 4 people, haven't we?
It's currently... What's currently been announced is me, you, Jimmy T from Right Click Save.
Yeah,
I think that's all that's been announced so far. There are more people on that panel, but not been announced.
Do we have a topic we're discussing, or are we just...
do I want to share it yet?
Can you share it with me privately at least?
Yeah, I'll share.
Do I learn when I'm on stage already?
No, I would share it with you. But for those of you listening that want to know what that is, and we'll probably announce it in more depth on the Atomic Hub socials at some point in the next few weeks. But yeah, there we go. So episode 40 in the books. If you're listening on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment with what you want us to talk about, who you want us to interview, all that good stuff. Apple, Spotify, 5-star podcast review, please. That'd be fantastic. There we go. Thank you very much for tuning in, for listening, for being with us. And we hope that you tune in again next time. I said that a bit ominously, didn't I?
Yeah,
that's because I'm not here next week.
Yeah, but maybe people will tune in now. Like, they're extra enticed. They want to know why that was ominous. I want to know why that was ominous. So.